Hello there. It's the beginning of my reading vlog for a craft book. It's May 22nd and Writing Scary Scenes by Rayne Hall just came, and so I'm excited to dive in. It is 129 pages, so it's really thin, should be a quick read, and hopefully it will help me with my horror. Alright, so I just read chapters 1 and 2, so I am barely into it. They're really short chapters. But chapter 1 was basically an emotional thesaurus for different feelings of suspense, unease, anxiety, apprehension, foreboding, excitement, dread, terror, revulsion, shock, panic, and horror. So, it was a little repetitive because a lot of them are so similar to each other, but it was cool. And then chapter 2, I don't know. It's called Instant Hooks. And so what they want you to do is use a sentence in like the first, second, or third sentence in every scene is state your objective so that the reader is hooked and will want them to achieve the objective and follow along the journey. But some of these, I think, instead of outright saying but showing, could be much more beneficial. Like the one that she says with the obstacles is, he had to cross the storm-tossed lake, but the boat was leaking and the water was infested with man-eating eels. I think it would be better to show him trying to get water out of the boat, and you hear the shrieks of the eels as they are encroaching upon the boat, and the curves of their backs as they rise against the tides and the water, and just being able to be in that moment. I think it would be so much more powerful than he had to cross the storm-tossed lake, but the boat was leaking and the water was infested with man-eating eels. I don't know. I didn't like that one. It says to do it with every scene, but vary the placement to first, second, or third sentence in the scene. So this one just doesn't vibe with me, but I don't know. Who am I to judge? Okay, in chapter 3, I like what she says about this psychological trick about focusing on the door or the gap in the hedge or whatever it is, the threshold that the character has to pass through to get to the danger. So slow down a little, focus on the weight of the keys in their hand. What does the door look like? Are there signs of danger? How is the light hitting it? Does it seem ominous? And just build up the tension before they cross the threshold. So like she says in the movies, the viewer screams inwardly, "Don't open that door." Of course, the protagonist opens it and enters. By now, the viewer is sitting on the edge of her chair, frightened out on the hero's behalf, needing to find out what happens next. So, I think just describing it, slowing down a little bit and describing it can definitely help. Just that little moment before everything hits the fan, before they go through the door or gap or into the cellar, whatever it is that they're doing. So I like that one. So chapter 4 is about having things take place in the dark, so that the other senses are heightened and it's more scary. She gives a bunch of ideas for how to make things dark, like a bullet shattering a light bulb, a canopy of trees blocking out the sun, a new moon, clouds veiling the moon, thick smoke, or a deep cave. And I liked one of the examples that she gave, which is Dean Koontz's The Bad Place. The apartment was a well of shadows, oil black and pooled deep. Faint ash-gray light outlined the windows but provided no illumination to the room. So here's the thing. I like shadows. When lighting, it's shaping the light to get the shadows to be how you want. So if you want the Rembrandt lighting, so you have the triangle of light on the one cheek and the other side in light, so you get almost half shadow but a little bit, and so you can get the glint in the eye so that they seem alive. So just playing with shadows, you have to have light to cast shadows. So that's one thing that I haven't really done much of. Like, in my story that takes place in a soot labyrinth underground, the main character is not quite human, and so they use the bioluminescent purple moss to get around and be able to kind of see. But, so I didn't describe things as pitch black because they had inhuman eyes, and so they could actually survive and flourish down there with all that was crawling around. I do describe things like the sunlight rising up the wall as the sun is setting, and then going, like, disappearing completely once the sun has set, and that's when the room breathes, and the shadow creature peels off of the wallpaper. So I do use little moments like that, like the little moments where a certain source of light disappears, like they would use in a Western to initiate a shootout, or in an anime to initiate a samurai sword draw. Like, just the little things that are like, okay, the change, the initiator. So, I've never played with complete blackness before in my stories. I don't know if that's just because I like to have the readers to have a hint of hope before I crush it in the end. Because that's one thing I like to do is have them be reading and be like, oh, it's so bleak, and then, oh, there's some hope, and then, nope. So having it not be in complete darkness gives the reader some hope still that things might turn out okay in the end, which does undercut the dread, but it makes the soul crush later that much more intense because they did have the hope. So I think it's a balance of what part of the story you're in. If you're in the soul crush part, that's when you can go full dark. But yeah, I like having light to cast the shadows. So the hope that reflects the despair that is possible. In chapter 5, Rayne is talking about using sounds. So obviously you should be using the 5 senses. But her example is, the knife came closer to her throat, and closer. She squirmed against the bonds, knowing it to be useless. Somewhere in the distance, a corridor slammed and a motor whined. The cold edge of steel touched her skin. She tried not to swallow. For me, this sound that they are describing doesn't work for me unless we know who is in that car and leaving, or if we know that she is in somewhere that is like suburbia and that help is so close. But normally when I would use sound, it would be something that is affecting the character, something that is imminent that they can hear, so that we are more in their shoes and not pulled out to the environment somewhere out that's happening while this is happening. So instead of somewhere in the distance, which is very, very vague. So just... Okay, so my sister just called and I had a little rant about this chapter. Okay, so my version of just changing the one sentence is, the knife came closer to her throat, and closer. She squirmed against the bonds, knowing it to be useless. Her captor's labored breathing was harsh and ragged, puffing against her face. The cold edge of steel touched her skin. She tried not to swallow. So doing things that are imminent to the character that they would be focusing on, because if you are tied to a chair and someone's coming at you with a knife, your ears are not going, there's a car somewhere in the distance. Like, you are focused on who is coming at you. At least in my mind, I don't know, but I've never had somebody pull a knife on me. So in my mind, you're immediately thinking on how to get out of that situation, and so you're focused on the threat. And not being... And just... The prose should not be vague of somewhere in the distance. But... Like... We don't know who is getting in the car and driving away. We don't know if this is in suburbia where the person trapped is so close to help, but it's somewhere in the distance, not on the other side of the wall. So, I don't know. Just keep things in the lens of the character. What would the character be focusing on? What would the character be hearing? Not what can you hear in the environment in general. So chapter 6 is about total isolation, and I think isolating your character can definitely sharpen your focus on that character and their feelings and response to fear, and increase the fear because they're by themselves and can't rely on others. Cut the lines of communication so their phones don't work. I think that this definitely can help have the sense of total self-reliance, but also you gotta make sure that your reason that the lines of communications are cut is believable and not just a cop-out reason. Like, they forgot to charge their phone when they're not, when they don't have a history of forgetting to do things. So make it a believable reason. Like, if it's they forgot to charge their phone, it's they thought they were charging their phone, but the plug was pulled from the socket slightly, so it didn't actually charge. Like, that's much more believable. Like, they would find that out in the morning and have a limited battery throughout the day, so when it finally dies, we accept it because it was hinted at, and it's not just, I forgot to charge my phone last night, when it's something that you do every day, because we live in a modern society that relies on technology like our own hands. So, yeah, just make it believable. Alright, chapter 7 is stripped tease, which is basically have your characters remove an article of clothing, whether it be a coat or a scarf, just to get them more vulnerable, less protected in layers of armor or clothing. An example that she gives is, she slipped out of her high-heeled shoes, then tossed them into a corner. One stocking followed, then the other. She unzipped her gown and pulled it over her head. This slow striptease technique is especially effective if the reader already suspects danger, but the protagonist is still unaware. I think that this would be the most effective if you have like a peeping Tom character, and so the character is unaware that they are doing this for an audience. I think that's where that would be the most effective. So the idea of taking off a layer of clothing, I've never really noticed it. I've always just thought of it as the necessity, like it's hot because you've come in out of the snow, so take off your jacket. I've never really thought of it as protective armor, but the idea of somebody watching undressing is definitely heightening the horror and the suspense. So yeah, I think I would only really use this if it was for a secret audience or a not so secret audience. So yeah. Chapter 8 is keep the clock ticking, which yes, you should. In certain situations there should be a definite deadline that they are trying to meet. In the example, I think they state the exact time that it is a little too often. Like, they should slow it down and stretch out the minutes in between each time, because it's a little repetitive when it says 2:05 and then 4 paragraphs later it says 3:05 and then the next paragraph is 2:54 and after 2 or 3 sentences it says 2:57. Like, it's too repetitive on how fast we're getting the time. You need to drag out every minute and try and fill it with as much dread and make this ticking clock count and have us feel what the character is feeling with their palms sweating and their heart racing and their mind going in spirals. I just think that the example, they could have dragged it out more, but yeah, I have used a ticking clock where in my Soot Scamp story, the main character takes a poison and an antidote at the same time to stop his heart and breathing, so that the skittering creature can't hear his heartbeat or his breathing, so it won't notice that he's there. And I have a countdown of it's actually more like a count up of, okay, I've taken it here, this is how long it's been, this is what is occurring to me physically now, I can't breathe, my heart is stopping, my vision is blackening out, the soot scamp is there staring at me, like trying to reach through the grating, and just elongating the seconds, elongating the minutes, and try and make it feel as if, oh my gosh, I'm actually gonna die because I may have not taken enough antidote, or maybe I should have taken the antidote even earlier than I took the poison. And just have the racing mind and ratchet up the tension can definitely be helpful. But maybe not mention exact, the clock says this time every like 2 paragraphs, or it was like every 3 sentences, but like maybe draw it out a little bit more. I don't know. Chapter 9, Feel the Fear. Pretty good. It's telling you to show, don't tell. So they still do label the feelings sometimes, like fear prickled her scalp, instead of saying her scalp prickled. But sometimes I do that too. Sometimes I will label it as part of the description, but I think it's better to do the physical symptoms to show that somebody is anxious or something like that. It also says avoid cliches like a shiver ran down her spine, make up your own, and use stronger verbs like instead of heart beat, heart thudded, heart pounded, heart hammered, and heart raced. Things like that, and vary the intensity. So, agreed. Chapter 10 has some good advice on how to quicken the pace of some sentences, how to cut the fluff and speed it up so that you are having a more hammering heart, like the character, like now, jump, like we gotta go. Have some incomplete sentences, just like short fragments, just to move it along and increase the tension. And also slow the pace down when you want to create a spooky atmosphere, describing background noises and everything. So yeah, have a variety of paces, some good stuff. Alright, so the chapter on euphonics, which is chapter 11. So scary sounding words, or like spooky sounding or foreboding sounding. I don't know. It says using words which have the right sound but the wrong meaning weakens your sentence. Use euphonics only when there is a choice of suitable words. So there is a caveat to that. But for foreboding, the example is the door groaned open and the door moaned shut. So the O's. And spooky is the door hissed open, the door whispered shut. So the S's for spooky. And for frightening is the door creaked open and the door squealed shut. So the E's. I don't know. It doesn't really do it for me. I'm sure it would help for things like poems, things that are read aloud, but I don't know. I usually just go with the word that means what I'm trying to say and not what sounds cool in a sentence. So I don't know. Maybe this is just past my level, so who knows? Chapter 12 is peaks and troughs. Good. Don't have it constant terror, but have ebbs and flows so that you have time to catch your breath and have a heartbeat reset of like, okay, I can breathe now, and then ramp it up again and have it ebb and flow. So, good. So chapter 13, structuring a scary scene, is a scene in 9 parts. So, scene goal, where you state what their goal is for the scene. Suspense, increased danger, first confrontation, escape, the trough, so the reprieve, realization, main confrontation, and then aftermath. So, it's basically you start with, here's what I gotta do, start setting the scene and building the spooky atmosphere, increase the danger, have the first confrontation with a minion, escape from the minion, have a little reprieve, realize, oh no, that wasn't the big bad, have it with the big bad, and then have an aftermath of you're either dead or you're imprisoned or like you escaped. Well, this one doesn't say dead, it just says escaped or imprisoned and doomed. So, yeah. I've never really had a minion before for my villains because I write flash and short story, so don't really have time for too many characters. But in my soot scamp, I do have different types of creatures. So I have the first confrontation be with a soot maven, reaching through the grating trying to consume my main character, and then the end, a different creature is revealed, so the main confrontation. So I do have that in that short story, so yeah, pretty decent. I just don't like explicitly saying here is my goal for this scene. Still, it's supposed to be a hook, but I don't know, just show what they're trying to do. Don't explicitly state it in a sentence, is my beef. Wow, this lighting is interesting. But I just got off of a really fun Discord play where it was me and my siblings, my sister's husband, and my brother's roommate. We were playing virtual mini golf. It was so fun. So I did that for a couple of hours, and I was also on Melanie's stream for the May Promptathon, so I wrote a flash fiction for that, posted it on the blog. But now it's time to get back to writing scary scenes. My OHIP card is my my health insurance card is my bookmark. I should probably find a real bookmark. But yeah, that was super fun. And time to get back to reading until I get really tired. So here we go. So chapter 14 is about setting, and it has lists of different types of settings. So yeah, could be useful. So chapter 15 is about using the senses. So it goes over the 5 senses plus the senses of balance, temperature, psychic awareness, and pain. So it was pretty short, but you should be using the senses, so it needed to be there. It tailors the senses towards more of a horror aspect of what is typically felt or touched or seen or smelled, that kind of thing, and how to contrast with temperatures, have them dressed for the wrong thing. So if it's cold, have them dressed like it's for warm weather, and vice versa, so that they're ill prepared, just to up the ante. So yeah, on to the next one. Alright, chapter 16 is about cliffhangers. She made a good point of, so your scene has a promise, so in her case actually stating the goal in a physical sentence, but you have a goal of the scene, and then the scene should resolve with yes, and, or no, but. The other one she said is she achieved only part of her goal, and to get the rest she has to do something dangerous, is the third option, which is kind of a no, but. So those are the 3 options she gave for how to end a scene. And have cliffhangers where you leave the person in peril and then cut away to a different point of view for a scene of somebody doing something related, so that you're left still wondering, and then cut back and show how they get out of the peril. Don't cut to the next day where the character's recovering. You have to actually show how they're getting out of the peril. So I agree with that. Definitely show how they get out of the peril. I've never written multiple POV before, so I haven't used that trick. But when I was reading Lord of the Rings the first time, I didn't know what was happening because they hadn't finished making the movies yet. So when Tolkien switched from one cast of characters, like at Shelob's lair, and then switched to the other cast of characters, I was so mad. It's like, we just got to the good part and now we're at the boring part with these characters, and then it finally gets to the exciting part and then it cuts and it goes to the other people, and you'd be so mad. I would be so mad. So I would caution using that. Don't go to boring parts with other characters during the middle of a tension. Make sure it is connected to it. And don't do it for too long. Get back to it, because that's annoying. Chapter 17, Villains and Monsters. There's an interesting idea here called slow increase. The very first time your heroine meets the villain, she may not find him very frightening. He may even come across as a kind, pleasant guy, and you may want to fool your reader into believing that he can be trusted, instead of using scare techniques to plant hints in the reader's mind. That could work for some villains, but I usually work with monsters and more Lovecraftian, so that doesn't work for my type of villains, usually. But it could work for certain types. And then she had one really good descriptor of somebody's voice that I'd never heard before that was cool. And it was, his voice had the low humming hiss of a wasp hovering over rotting fruit. So that was, I think, the best example she's had in the whole book so far. So, yeah. Next, she's describing smiles, hands and claws, eyes, nobility, movement, and smells and cliches to avoid. So, just little things that you can use to describe these things. Not how to create them for your character, but how to describe them once you've come up with your monster or villain. Ooh, okay. So in the nobility section, there's a really good point. During the scariest hero-villain confrontation, show the villain's noble side. This will raise the hero's and the reader's hope that the villain can be reasoned with, a hope you and your villain will of course dash before long, thus increasing the suspense. That's fun, because I like being able to raise people's hopes and then dashing it for a harder fall. So, making it seem like maybe they could be reasoned with, and then, nah. That's a fun point. Chapter 18 is Captivity, and it goes over the different senses and what to describe if you're stuck in a dungeon. Yeah, it's pretty limited of the descriptions to like a classic castle dungeon type of thing. So you would need different ones for more sci-fi, but yeah, it was okay. She really likes to make things happen in the dark for this Captivity, but I think what she's trying to get at is make it opposite of what they're used to, I think would be a better way to put it. So if they're human, they're used to being able to see things, usually. So they're used to things being visible, and so making things not visible by keeping them in the dark. She likes to talk about making things cold, but if your character is a frost giant, make things hot instead, is what I would say. So don't just make things dark and cold, make things opposite of what the character or creature is designed for. So that's my 2 cents. Don't just make it dark and cold, make it opposite of what they're used to. So that's how I would say it. Chapter 19 is Chases and Escapes. Just super basic, quick information. And physical symptoms she describes in like 5 sentences. If you want to go into physical symptoms of like what you're feeling, I would suggest things more like the emotional thesaurus. But yeah, like have danger from the surroundings, have them stumble, have different pacing with the sentences, so go back to shorter sentences. You keep bringing up euphonics. So yeah, and have your character put up a fight. Don't have them faint and wake up in a dungeon. So yeah, I agree with that. Have them put up a fight. Have us root for them. Chapter 20, Violence and Gore. Basically just keep your descriptions of gore to what your average reader is expecting for your genre. So if you are marketing it as a splatterpunk, like, there's gonna be gore up the yin yang. But if you are not advertising it as extreme, then there probably shouldn't be extreme, or else it will alienate a lot of your readers. She says, if you want to shock, horror, or revulsion, but not too much, make the description graphic but keep them short, perhaps just a sentence or two. So she gave a couple of short sentences on some gore that were pretty effective. So yeah, it was a really short chapter. And the humor chapter is also super short for this one. So chapter 21, humor, she says, use a familiar element, something harmless from earlier in the book. Place it into the scary context, perhaps even in a way which makes the situation worse for the hero. I don't know if it's just the way the example was written, but I didn't really find it funny. So, I don't know. Maybe it's just different types of humor. Chapter 2 is backloading, so putting the best word of your sentence as the last word of your sentence to make it more impactful. You don't need to backload every single sentence in your manuscript. Backload the last sentence of some paragraphs, including the last sentence of the scene, because that's where the impact is greatest. So words like death, dead, kill, blood, fear, die, deep, thrill, scar, bone, child's, teeth, things like that. Some of the example sentences are a little Yoda-ish, but it could definitely work for some of these. It does. Like, she knew she had to kill it, instead is she knew she had to kill, is more impactful. So for a couple of these it does work. Chapter 23, the story's first and final scenes. So start with suspense, not terror. Avoid cliche beginnings. The endings one I found interesting. The hero is defeated by the monster, she claims should only be for short stories, which I found interesting, because if you've written a full-length novel and the reader has been reading a full-length novel, they have become super invested in the character and don't want them to die, and so you should go with one of the other types of endings. So that was an interesting point. Tim Wagner in Writing in the Dark had a lot more endings and a lot more description about the types of endings and the drawbacks of the different types of endings. So I would recommend that section of his book instead. But she has the point to avoid anticlimactic endings. So where it was just a dream or a simulation. The monster isn't really a monster, but a harmless pet / friendly alien. Yeah, the villain is actually an anonymous supporter or a long-lost loving mother. So things to avoid. But yeah, I usually have my characters die in a lot of my flash. So something to consider. Chapter 24, Black Moment and Climax Scenes. Basically just have a dark night of the soul and have a ticking clock, and it's just like a summary of all the other chapters. Like, make sure you have an interesting, dangerous location, make sure that there is some emotion in it, and does your hero have an overwhelming fear, perhaps a phobia? So maybe include things that are pertinent to your character's fears. So it was really short and basically just a summary of use everything you've learned so far in the book. Chapter 25 is genres, and so they go over a bunch of different genres and explain how different techniques in this book could be used for the different genres. Science fiction only has 2 sentences. So sad. But yeah. super basic, but I liked that with cozy mystery. Says, unlike the thriller readers, the buyers of cozy mysteries do not want to be scared. A slight acceleration of the pulse and a tingle of the spine are enough for her. Take care not to step beyond her boundaries or gross her out. So, I like how they split up like horror, thriller, and cozy mystery. So, yeah. Alright, chapter 26, The Wimp Effect. So, there's a wimp test of different ways that a character could get points on how wimpy they are. Couple examples. They're super wimpy. But I really liked the points of delete sighs, shrugs, inhales, exhales, lip biting, cheek chewing, swallowing, etc. Don't let your protagonist do a lot of thinking, and never let two parts of their psyche engage in a conversation. Amen to that. Ways to make your character less wimpy. And so you can root for the character more, they feel stronger, and your reader likes them more. The last bit of this book is story examples, so I will read them. And that's the end of the book, so I'll report back. Okay, I finished the 3 short stories in the back. The druid one, I was a little confused when it switched into a flashback. I thought maybe she wasn't alone, but then after the flashback, it was revealed that it was a flashback, so that I understood. They were alright. No lines jumped out at me except for in the distance something howled, or like in the distance there was an owl. And so she likes to cut away from the action to somewhere out there a sound happens, and it bugs me. Have the sound be relevant to the character, don't have it somewhere out there somewhere. But yeah, overall this book is just okay. There's some things I like about it, some things I don't, obviously. Writing in the Dark by Tim Wagner is much better at doing different things, like the different endings that horror can have, and the different types of horror, and the pros and the cons, and how to create the monster, and also just get writing in the dark instead. And the Emotion Thesaurus is also helpful instead of this one, with what your body does with certain emotions and how it reacts. Yeah. I don't think I'll get any more by this author. Yeah, one and done, so I would not recommend this one very highly unless you like, I don't know. Good morning. It's the next day. So I slept on my thoughts for scary scenes by writing scary scenes by Rayne Hall. And my conclusion is, if you can get it for free from a library or something like that, do it. But I don't know how much it's worth to actually go out and buy it. I agree with some of the chapters, but not all the chapters. So, yeah. Get it from your local library if you can. But, so I think I would give it a 5 out of 10. Maybe a 6. Because a lot of the information in there I read in other writing craft books, but better. Like Writing in the Dark and The Anatomy of Prose. So, and the Emotional Thesaurus. So, This is a good little summary of some things in those books, plus some other things in there, like the doors, about focusing on the door before you go through it to get to the horror on the other side. So I liked that little chapter. It's a really quick read, so yeah, if you want to, give it a shot. So thank you so much for watching and sticking around through this review, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!